Welcome back to the HerbRally podcast. I'm your host, Mason Hutchison. Today's episode is yet another edition of the Herbalist Hour, and this time I'm joined by Kevin Spelman. We had a very interesting and wide-ranging chat. We talk about his herbal mentors, what he does as an herbalist for a living, lion's mane, what he calls Stockholm syndrome of integrative medicine, a fantastic story about Linus Pauling, how he ranks the pillars of health, that's diet, sleep, and exercise, and a whole lot more. So I really enjoyed catching up with Kevin. It's been a while since I had a chat with him, so I really think you're going to dig this episode. Big thanks to Kevin for joining me on the Herbalist Hour. Before we get into the show, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, and that is Oshala Farm. So Oshala Farm is a beautiful and vibrant, certified organic farm located in southern Oregon. And I'm good buddies with the owners, Elise and Jeff Higley. So I can definitely vouch for their growing practices as well as their business practices. So if you're looking to purchase U.S. grown, organically grown, with love, medicinal and culinary herbs, definitely check out Oshala Farm. When you support them, when you purchase herbs from Oshala Farm, you're also helping support HerbRally. Since they are the presenting sponsor. So we'd really appreciate it if you're looking to purchase some herbs. Definitely look into Oshala Farm at oshalafarm.com and let them know that Mason from HerbRally sent you. So huge shout out. Thank you to Oshala Farm for supporting the Herbalist Hour. Also want to say a huge thank you to our HerbRally Schoolhouse members. Actually, we had some members join us for our last couple of episodes during the Herbalist Hour. So that's one of the perks of being an HerbRally Schoolhouse member is when we record these live interviews via Zoom. Our members are actually able to join us and chime in with some questions and so on. So thank you for joining us and thank you for showing up. If you'd like to learn more about the HerbRally Schoolhouse, simply head to herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And don't forget to use coupon code PODCAST at checkout to try your first 30 days for free. Along with hanging out with us during the Herbalist Hour interviews, there's also a bunch of classes in the member area, private Facebook group, herbal community discounts, including one for Oshala Farm, and more. So thanks, y'all, and thank you, dear listener, for tuning in as always, and enjoy this interview with none other than Kevin Spelman. Bye.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Oh, mommy, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today, I'm really excited to have on Dr. Kevin Spelman. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thanks, Mason. It's really good to be here, and I'm excited to see where we go.
I had a lot of fun writing questions for this episode. And just to kind of start things off, Kevin, not to like brown nose too much, but you and Dr. Jillian Stansberry, whenever I take your classes at various herbalism events, I want to say I glean about 10% of the content because a lot of it just goes right over my head. And now, granted, I'm not like a professional herbalist per se, but it just kind of shows your level of expertise and who you're actually speaking to. But so I started feeling quasi intimidated to have this conversation. But then I was like, Kevin's a chill guy. He's just a guy. So I'm excited to get to know you a little bit more. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, thanks for that. That's a really high compliment. To be put in the same class as Jillian. She's one of my favorite naturopaths on the planet. I think her and Mary Bove just have really had a lifetime of clinical experience, and we should be paying very closely to their writings and to their lectures and to what they say.
Amen. And actually, yeah. So I've seen your lectures at, I want to say it was the Northwest Herbal Symposium, where I was also first introduced to Dr. Mary Bove, and I've been emailing back and forth with her a little bit. So she's going to be on the show here in the coming months. Very excited to reconnect with her as well. But why don't we kick things off getting to know what were you like as a kiddo?
Trouble. What was I like as a kid? Well, I guess I was. That's a really good question. I guess I was pretty quiet and scared, honestly. I was raised by some parents, especially a mother that was afraid of the world, and she kind of passed that on to me, and I had to break out of that, and I broke out of that in my adolescence, as most kids do when they start rebelling from their parents. But I was studious and quiet and afraid of the world.
Well, as I was mentioning pre-show, I was watching one of your lectures that you were teaching at an Ayurvedic resort of some sort, and you were talking about how there was some sort of experiment on mice where if they're growing up in a dangerous environment, we could look at that as a bad thing. But then you were saying it also could be a good thing in the sense that, well, this is what I took away from it, in the sense that it helped kind of prepare you, fortify you for the dangers of the world. Is that kind of how you see your childhood?
Well, that's that's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, there is really interesting research where there's epigenetic changes in gene expression due to early upbringing. So people that are raised in, for example, fearful environments, or for example, what's going on the planet now, people who are raised in environments where bombs are killing people and there's brutality around weapons, the use of weapons and whatnot, that really changes the potential for a child to be able to fully integrate and relax into their environment. Now, that's the potentially negative side. The potentially net positive side is that those people are more likely to survive because they're on alert than people that have never had any trouble in their life and think that everybody's trustworthy. And there's advantages to both sides there. I'm not saying one is right or wrong, but we certainly have to be aware that our early upbringings really do affect us. And we can come out of that, but it takes time and it takes work. And it's not a quick fix. It's not seeing a counselor 3 times and being done. Right. It might be a lifetime of therapy, and it also might be a number of entheogenic experiences. Who knows what it is, but it's going to depend on the person. But that's a really interesting question. So did my life prepare me for that? Well, I really, that fearful environment that I grew up in, I guess maybe I came out of it because I think I've been in, at this point, about 36 countries, and I've worked in probably half a dozen countries and done quite a lot of traveling. And my mother, I remember being so incredibly alarmed when I told her I was hitchhiking down into Mexico, and she said, "Well, just give me the places you're going to stay." And I said, "I don't know where I'm going to stay."
Freestyle. No way. Yeah, absolutely. I want to say I had quasi rough upbringing at various points in my life, and I also, at the same token, I know it's helped me out a lot. It's given me strengths that I might not have had otherwise, and I also wouldn't want to trade places with anybody. I used to be like, woe is me in a lot of ways, but now I'm kind of just accepting a lot of it and just have moved forward. And I really do feel grateful for the blessings that have come about from it. But what was your early, like, say, herbal journey like? Who have been some of your mentors? When did you first start getting into the plants?
So, well, let me take a step back from that and just say, when did I start questioning this system of medicine? And that happened really early for me. I remember being like, I have a slight scoliosis in my spine, and I grew up with a lot of back pain. And I remember complaining to my father about it, and he finally took me to an orthopedic doc. And the doc barely looked at my back, didn't catch the scoliosis, touched me twice in various spots, very gently, not really anything to elicit any sort of a response. And he said, "Oh, it's probably fine. Just take aspirin." And that moment right there, I was like, "Whoa, this is really messed up. Like, this is not." He obviously didn't hear me. This has been going on for my whole childhood, and yeah. So I think that's when I started mistrusting the system. From there, I started getting into yoga and reading as much nutrition as I could get my hands on. And this is the days before the internet. If any of you out there remember that.
Absolutely, I remember that.
But so yeah, and that kind of got me into plants, because I started seeing plants had a lot of nutrients in them, and that was my first introduction to plants. And at one point, there's a book out. I don't know if it's still in publication. Herbally Yours by Penny Royal, which is probably
a pen name.
A pen name. Yeah. And I've got some warts on my hand. And so I looked up warts and I started treating my warts, and it actually went away. So I started with buckthorn bark and vitamin C and some vitamin A, and it actually worked. So that caught my attention. So at this point, I'm probably early 20s. And from there, I got a job at an herb store after I took my first year of Ayurvedic training. And so that was Eastern herbs, but in the herb store was obviously mostly Western herbs. So that gave me a really good start. The mentors, I have to say, that have been really big for me. I was just thinking about this the other day. Jim Duke was a very close mentor to me, and I lived with him for a while. I had a room that they actually called Kevin's room because
oh wow,
because I lived with him for a while. So Jim was just really, really special to me. Simon Mills, I would say, was also a mentor. And there's been other mentors through the years, but Dr. Basant Lad, obviously, from my Ayurvedic training, was just really, he was somebody that grounded spirituality into health, the model of health for me, that I really, really appreciated. And then I'd have to say Michael Moore was a huge mentor for me. I went through a program with him, and then I taught for him for a couple of years. And Michael was just an incredible, incredible being. And I was fortunate. I took some time off from, back then it was called Pai Sophia Institute, and traveled for a semester. And one of the places I went was right before Michael died. I got to spend some time with him. He was set up in, was it Bisbee?
Yeah, that sounds right.
I think it was Bisbee at the time. Yeah. And spent some time with him, and that was really a blessing for me. It was really nice to sit with him again. So I'd say those are probably the main mentors. There's other mentors out there, I'm sure, that I'm missing, but those are the main ones.
Okay. I didn't realize you studied with Michael Moore. Now, a lot of these episodes, I've asked folks to tell stories of Michael Moore, but you're the first person I know that has actually lived with, say, Jim Duke, and he's also another fascinating character for me. Do you have any fond memories or stories you'd like to share about Jim?
Sure, I do. Some of my favorite times with Jim. So in that early Pai Sophia days, now it's called Maryland University of Integrative Health, but in those early Pai Sophia days, so Jim was about a mile and a half from our campus. So he was close, and so I spent a lot of time over there even before I was living with him. And we would go every year, not every semester, but every year, we would go to Paul Strauss's place, UPS, and spend time there. And those became my favorite times because I got to get out of the classroom and actually be with the plants. Speaking of that, just a quick side note. When we started that program, there was so much work to do in terms of passing information on to students. And this is how we did it. Other people would do it differently, and I understand that. But I just remember looking up one day, James Snow is next to me at the desk next to me, and we're both on our computers preparing a class. And I looked at him and I said, "Remember when we used to be herbalists and go outside?" Because we spent all this time in front of the screen. So being at Paul Strauss's was really an incredible blessing. And Jim used to join us there. And Jim would be in bare feet, romping through the forest with us, going up and down muddy slopes. And that was, he loved to be barefoot because he basically had neurology in his legs, and it was the only way he could feel the earth.
Wow.
It gave him more sensation. So that was how he kept his balance, was actually not having shoes on. And it could be raining out there and be cold, and Jim was in bare feet.
What a badass. I love it.
He really was.
All right. Well, so we got a little background on you, on your childhood, your journey to becoming an herbalist. What do you do now? I feel like you wear a lot of different hats. I like to know about the Spelman report as well, but what do you do currently as an herbalist?
So I do a number of things. The two main things that I do at this point is I still see clients, slash patients, whatever you want to call them. And don't get me into the politics of that. But I really like helping people. So I faded away for a while during my PhD process. I faded away from that because I just had too much on my plate. But just in the last couple of years, it's slowly and steadily grown, even though I haven't sought it out. And I'm actually considering going back to full-time clinical work at this point. So that's one thing I do. But where I actually am able to make a living, because I don't see enough patients to do that, is I work for the industry. So I do a lot of product development, do a lot of formulation. I've probably got over 100 formulations out there on shelves. Wow. I've got three formula patents at this point as well. And I really enjoy product development. I'm starting to do more and more sourcing. But basically, I've done everything from analytical interpretation of analytical results. I just wrote a safety dossier for a cannabis company in Missouri that the Division of Cannabis Regulation in Missouri basically pulled all their products saying they were public health safety issues. And I went through all the data that I could get and interviewed a bunch of people around this. And sure enough, there was no real reason. That there was a big misunderstanding about the people running the Division of Cannabis Regulation. And so after that safety dossier, they got 80% of they had literally millions of dollars of product recalled or on hold. And after that safety dossier, the Missouri Division of Cannabis Regulation folded, and they got 80% of their products back on the shelf. So that was really rewarding to see. But yeah, I basically help companies at this point, whatever it is.
Would you call that like a consultant? I want to say when I was chatting with you at the Northwest Herb Symposium, yeah, that's primarily what you were doing as a consultant for other. Are you able to share which companies you've worked for, or what, say, formulas might be out there on the shelves? And if not, that's totally fine. But I want to say a lot of times when I ask herbalists if they have any like business advice for the aspiring herbal entrepreneur, a lot of times they'll say niche down, find what it is that is one of your strengths, and just really niche down in the herbal community in that way. And I feel like this is kind of an under recommended path, is becoming, like, say, a consultant or a product developer for various companies. First of all, yeah, are you able to share like how you go about doing that, or who you work with?
Sure. I can mention some names. I mean, it's been everything from really small companies, small cannabis startups, and don't get me started on cannabis startups. Just if you're going to work for a cannabis startup, do not just take stock. Definitely get paid, and make your payment up front before you do your work.
Good advice.
We got a real problem with cannabis startups in this country. As opposed to Canada, where they're actually prim and proper, and they know what they're doing, and they're safe as well. So there's that. I've worked for traditional medicinals. I've worked for New Chapter. I've worked for probably about 50 different companies at this point. But yeah, I have a small consulting company called Health Education and Research, and we service the industry. So I like your advice around niche down, but I have to say, if I had done that early in my career, I wouldn't have been able to make a living through my consulting company. So I basically took almost everything I could get my hands on. I didn't say no very often. These days I say no a lot, but I didn't say no very often because I needed to make a living. Now, granted, I had a good education in the industry. I've done everything from educate to I've run an analytical lab. Like I said, I've got tons of formulations out there. I've done new product development. So I didn't come in green and say yes to something that I couldn't handle. But these days I am niching down, as you say, and product development and formulation has really been my thing. But I do a lot of substantiation files, claim substantiation files, which I actually really enjoy because it gets me back into the materia medica. So yeah, that's kind of what it is.
Just a quick break from the show to thank our presenting sponsor, Oshala Farm. Oshala Farm is a beautiful and vibrant certified organic herb farm based in Southern Oregon, where they grow and sell over 80 different plant species. The founders, Elise and Jeff Higley, have been longtime friends, so I highly trust their growing methods and ethics. You'll love the potency and vibrancy of all the herbs they have to offer. To learn more and purchase their herbs and other organic goods, head to oshalafarm.com. So thanks once again to Oshala Farm for sponsoring the Herbalist Hour. Now back to the show. Enjoy. So you're almost saying if you're starting early, be broad, take as much work as you could get, and then as you move forward and develop an expertise, then you could start niching down.
Yeah, I think I would say that about clinical practice as well. One of the things that happened at Ty which moved into MUIH, was we had them, and this was somewhat my idea, but I got the faculty on board. We had them niche down in terms of clinical practice, become a specialist in something. And now when I look back at that, I think it was too soon for them to niche down, because you don't know what you don't know in terms of other conditions. And you really want to be able, as an herbalist, you really want to be able to be family practice. You really want to be more like a internist rather than a specialist. Then once you see it all, then you can actually start to put all the pieces together in a way that I think makes you a better herbalist as you specialize. If you don't see all the pieces, we get blind in our specialties, and this definitely happens in medicine. But I think it can happen in herbal medicine as well.
Well, this could be a nice transition to what we were chatting about pre-call, about a particular topic you'd like to chat about. But first, I want to say hi to HerbRally Schoolhouse member Elizabeth for joining us. Well, we were chatting pre-call about this Stockholm syndrome of integrative medicine. So can you share more about that?
Yeah, so I have to say, this comes from watching some of my colleagues that have their head so, now understand, this is coming from a scientist. I'm a medical scientist, and I definitely spend a lot of my day looking at research, looking at studies, whether they be in vitro, animal, which I don't necessarily agree with, and or human clinical trials. I spend a lot of time sorting through the literature. So understand that that's where I'm coming from when I say this. And that is to say, I've seen a lot of my colleagues stop believing in herbal medicine because they've spent so much time with their heads in the literature that I call it Stockholm syndrome. They have now become so enamored by the medical literature, thinking that all the answers are there, when in fact, very little of the answers are there. There's some data there, and these data can be very useful to help guide us, but there's so much that is not there, right? Let's look at hypericum, for instance. Like, we talk about hypericum for depression. What about for neuralgia, right? What about for neuropathic pain? It's excellent for that. You see any studies on that? Well, there might be one or two, but we start to pigeonhole herbs because of these studies, and we forget that herbs tend to be pleiotropic. And what do I mean by pleiotropic? They multi-targeted. They can hit many different targets and therefore have an effect on many different conditions. And if you look at the traditional use of any herb, they were used for many different conditions. The medical research tends to pigeonhole it, and that's useful for that condition. But remember, there's so much more to herbs than one condition.
When you say colleagues, are you saying these colleagues of yours are herbalists, or are they more in the science field? Or I
would say that they at one point called themselves herbalists.
Gotcha.
And then lost their way, the way I see it. And maybe that's their path, and that maybe they're happy there, and that's fine. But from my perspective as an herbalist, I would say that they lost their way and started thinking that the only way to understand herbs was a randomized clinical trial, which I would definitely disagree with. Is it useful? Absolutely. But also, I mean, here's the problem with randomized clinical trials. It's like you've got 2 groups, maybe 3 groups, maybe you're doing dose dependent, whatever. You've got just a few groups. All the people basically make up the same type of person with a condition or a problem of some sort. And so we don't get into constitution. We don't get into it. Now, this we could very easily. We could substratify these groups, and that would be fantastic information. Remember that most of these studies you get, and I'm not just talking about herbs here, I'm talking about pharmaceuticals as well. It's very rare to get, for example, an effect over 50 or 60%. Why is that? Because there's some people in the treatment group that are non-responders. And these non-responders may have a particular genotype or epigenetic genome or Ayurvedic constitution or yin yang, however you want to classify it. But remember, one of the good things about herbal medicine is that we tend to really focus in on the person and their individual needs and their individual responses rather than one size fits all. And that's one of the ways that, for example, actually, I'm not going to use any names. For example,
Thank you.
there's people out there that have written books that this herb is for that. And so now take this herb instead of this drug. This is not green farm. I mean, yeah, you can practice herbal medicine as green pharmacy, but that is not what herbal medicine, that does not highlight the depth and the profound potential healing that I believe herbal medicine and medicinal plants have to offer.
I guess that's one of the reasons you probably enjoy staying in clinical practice, because then you're actually able to see how the herbs work on various people. I also wanted to say, I want to say when I first started getting into herbalism, the cliche example is valerian. You know, what is it, like 25% of the people are, say, like energized by it or whatever, whereas the other are more calmed down by it, which is that kind of what you're talking about here?
Yeah. And I would say that the people that I've seen react to valerian as a stimulant usually tend to be a hot constitution.
Gotcha.
Or pitta, if you want to use an Ayurvedic term.
What kind of a constitutional model do you find yourself using? Because it sounds like you're an Ayurveda guy as well, but yeah, how do you look at constitution in your practice?
It's a really good question, and it's grown really in a profound way since I got out of Ayurvedic school. So when I got out of Ayurvedic school and I started practicing full time, I was really looking at very strict classifications of the Prakruti and the Vikruti. Prakruti being the base constitution, the Vikruti being the dysfunctional energy there. And so I really kind of held to that. And I used to hand out lists that these foods are good for your Vata condition and these foods are not, good for your Vata condition. And the more I got into practice and the more I started seeing responses, the more I started to realize is that, look, we live in a world where availability of foods and practices, lifestyles is tremendous. And we can't just cut off half of the world from people. We have to think about increase and decrease versus a binary 0 and 1, yes and no. And I think that's really, really important. And I still see people out there that, the 2-week training courses in Ayurveda that now people are experts where, they're like, oh, no, you shouldn't eat that food. Well, I disagree. Maybe a little of that food is just fine. And maybe you need to eat other foods more frequently, but just to cut stuff out completely just doesn't make any sense to me. So that's one way I have really viewed from the Ayurvedic perspective, constitution. But the other way, people have been writing about constitution for centuries, literally, um, and in Western world, I mean, so actually Ayurveda and Chinese medicine go back thousands and thousands of years, right? But to look at Western medicine, there's been this sense of constitution for a really long time, and it got basically put to bed in the 40s, in the 1940s, when penicillin came out, and actually I think that was the 50s. But in any event, when drugs started becoming stronger and stronger, it was now chemical reliance rather than subtleties. Doctors eventually stopped doing physical exams and really stopped interacting with the patient versus these are the symptoms and this is the drug I'm going to give you, which pharma loves, by the way.
Sure.
They're laughing all the way to the bank.
Right. Yeah.
So I just really think that, and in fact, I hope that there's a paper in me that I really want to write about constitution that is so deeply entwined in my head, or I should even say entangled in my head, that I don't know that I'll ever be able to get it out on paper. But I do think that there's a lot of different models. And if we look at all those models and put them together, I think we're going to have a really solid model. Not to say that Ayurveda and Chinese medicine don't have great models. They do. But I think any Ayurvedic practitioner will tell you that at times they're a little confused about what exactly is going on in terms of Vikruti, the current dysfunction of the energies in the body. And I think a more robust model drawing in from all different sources, much as they did in physics. I mean, this is what happened in physics early on when they started realizing the nature of reality was very strange. They used something called a bootstrap model, where they took, a part of one theory and part of another theory to make a whole and better theory. And I think that's exactly what needs to happen with integrative medicine in general, but definitely around constitution.
You were mentioning you might write this article someday. Is that where you would publish it, say, in the Spelman report? Is that what the Spelman report is like a collection of the articles that you're writing?
No, the Spelman report is really a series of interviews with people that I find inspiring and that I think have something to offer integrative practitioners.
Okay.
I have backed off the Spelman report basically because I thought I would get the support of the herbal community. I did not, and I was really surprised by that. I had more MDs signing up for it than I did herbalists, which I found really sad, because my whole goal there was to do what Jeff Bland did with functional medicine update. It had many names over 3 decades, but functional medicine update was one of the names that was used for many years. It became synthesis in the end, but I found such inspiration from Bland in terms of tying pieces together. His biochemical and molecular biology pathway understanding was so good that he could just tie things together in a really brilliant way and make us see the underpinnings on a molecular level of disease processes. And not that I wanted to necessarily do that in that style, but I wanted to do that with medicinal plants and offer something to the community. I may pick it back up at some point, but I have dropped it at this point.
Is it? I'm presuming it's behind a paywall. Is that what?
It was behind a paywall.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. We got a comment.
And everybody told me that I should not put it behind a paywall and just take advertisement. But I thought that would make my science questionable if I took payment from advertisers. So that's why I never did it.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let me read this comment from Elizabeth here. Hey, Kevin and Mason, absolutely concur regarding cannabis industry, both state programs and hemp. And yes, I spent a lot of time discussing the crippling effect of the trend toward exclusive science-based herbalism, in quotes. I believe that science is a useful tool of elucidation, but cannot be the basis of herbalism. I met you while griping about the subject at an event, not knowing you were lecturing on it. Question, regarding the use of cannabis and herbalism. It seems virtually non-existent in the dispensary and pharma industries, both. I'm making efforts to do something. What are you seeing? Are you engaged in an effort to integrate cannabis into herbalism, and similar for psychedelic medicine? I was going to ask you about that as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I do, and so I think that. So here's my main concern about that. I think that yes, we should be doing that. And in fact, when I was practicing full time, what I did was I had a tincture of cannabis that I kept at home because I was in a physician's clinic, and I didn't want, if anything went wrong, I didn't want him in trouble. So I kept that at home, and I would use it on occasion with certain clients slash patients. But I would have to go out of my way to bring it to them. That's how I handled it back in the 80s. What I think here's the main issue that I'm concerned about. First of all, as practitioners of herbal medicine, depending on the state you're in, for example, the Health Freedom Act is useful for us, but depending on the state you're in, we're already fringe, and if you're, depending on how you practice, basically, I can honestly say that I think the way that I practiced, many people would think that I was practicing medicine without a license. And, that's not good if you get caught. So, and I can't believe I'm saying this on air, but here it goes.
We could cut it out if you want.
Good, we might do that. So my thought about this is we're already fringe, and to bring cannabis into the situation makes us even potentially more fringe and more liable, more legal risk, if you will. And so that's my main concern. Is it a good medicine? Absolutely, it's a great medicine. My belief is that THCA is a really pharmacologically active molecule, and I've seen this and I've felt it on myself. And I'm not sure that I think there are situations where THC is useful, but I'm not sure that we need THC exclusively. THCA, CBDA, CBD, CBG, CBGA, all of these molecules are incredibly useful. And I think that we can probably have a really good practice without using THC. So, and I know there are places, there is indications for THC, but yeah, I think that's one thing that I would recommend to herbalists is explore the acidics and explore the minor cannabinoids, because they're actually incredibly active. THCV, CBDV, right? So that would be where I put it.
Kevin, are you in Oregon or California? You're in one of those states, aren't you?
I'm in one of the only states that doesn't have any sort of cannabis law. I'm in Idaho these days.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I'm Driggs, Idaho. I'm on the western slope of the Teton Mountains.
Gotcha. It's beautiful out there.
If I have a bad day, I just go outside and look at the scenery.
I only asked because Elizabeth and I are both Wisconsinites, and as far as I know, it's still highly restricted here, cannabis. And I'm coming from Oregon. I lived in Oregon my whole life, where it's very ubiquitous. Every street corner has a cannabis shop. So it's different out here, but there's a lot of booze out here.
Yeah, I used to say, I lived in Oregon, as you know, for quite a while. And one of the things I used to say is, if you have to buy cannabis in Oregon, you don't know anybody.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. Yeah. What's it like in Idaho for you? Is it legal there too? Is that what you said?
No, it's one of the only states that doesn't have any sort of law at all.
Oh, gotcha. Well, I was asking you pre-call if we could talk about some plants. And I saw that you have posted on your Instagram account about lion's mane, which is a particular interest to me. I guess that's a fungi, not a plant. But can you teach us a little bit about your fascination with lion's mane, some of the benefits or virtues of it?
Sure. So I think lion's mane has incredible potential. Um, incredible potential. Here's the problem. Right now, everybody's with mushrooms in general, I would say this is a problem. We're over focused on beta glucans in mushrooms, and we're ignoring, for example, the triterpenes in reishi, or for example, the hericenones and the erinosines in lion's mane, the aratidine in dropping a starts with an maitake. There's lots of other compounds that are incredibly active that basically, if you did a beta glucan extraction, in other words, using water or low concentration ethanol, you really wouldn't get these other compounds. And this is what most mushroom companies are doing. So I think we really need to rethink our mushrooms. The beta glucans are great. They're wonderful. They're good immunomodulators, and even immune stimulants at times, depending on how it's used. But in the case of lion's mane, or Erythium erinaceus, as you may know it, the erinosines and the hericenones are compounds that are somewhat lipophilic, fairly lipophilic, let's put it that way, and therefore they're not going to come out in water very easily. You'll get a little bit when you make a tea, but not much. Their concentration, the best extraction you're going to get is around 70% ethanol. In terms of the best concentration of ethanol to get these compounds is about 70% ethanol. And they're in low concentrations. Now, everybody that I know in the industry that has mushroom experience will tell you a story about, and this isn't the same story, they're different people, but let me just give you an example. An older man that was really active, and now he's going into dementia, and he doesn't know who anybody is, and he spends a lot of time in his bed, and he's not necessarily easy to deal with. And then they started giving him lion's mane, and after 2 months, suddenly he was just fine and could have a conversation with people, and he seemed to be, the dementia seemed to be mostly gone. He was still forgetful, but he wasn't demented. This is a really common experience with people with the use of hericenones and erinosines. And I think that there's a potential to do the proper extraction where you concentrate those compounds and turn that 2 or 3 months into use of lion's mane into maybe a couple of weeks, where you can affect really serious change in somebody who's in early Alzheimer's disease. That's my belief. I could be wrong, but I really believe that mushrooms, lion's mane mushroom, erythrine and erinosines can do that. And by the way, the erinosines are found mostly in the mycelia, and the hericenones are found mostly in the fruiting body. So this is one of the only examples I use where I'm usually a fruiting body guy with mushrooms, and this is the only time that I would actually say we really want both the mycelia and the sporocarp.
What about just eating the lion's mane as food? Are you still going to get all of those benefits, do you think?
You're still going to get them all, yeah. But remember, these compounds are there in very low concentrations. Now, if you're just a little forgetful, I think that's fine. But if we're really dealing with, and this is why I think it's got so much potential, I really believe that lion's mane has the potential to offer something to Alzheimer's patients that basically our pharmacological endeavors into treating Alzheimer's disease have really come up empty. There's been over 400 drugs that they've tried that have all failed. So I think this is, and I'm not saying we turn it into a drug, but I'm saying that if we make the right extraction of this, we could actually maybe have a potential impact on early Alzheimer's disease.
Do you take lion's mane tonically, or if not, are there herbs that you're taking for your general health on a regular basis?
Oh yeah. Oh my God. I use a lot of herbs. Yeah, I do. I use quite a lot of stuff, and I use some nutraceuticals as well. As I started formulating, maybe 20 years ago, I slowly found my way into some nutraceuticals besides just medicinal plants. But yeah, I'm a big fan of lion's mane. Sadly, I'm a big fan of reishi. I'm a big fan of cordyceps. But sadly, in my early 40s, I developed after using very large amounts of reishi to keep me going, when I was working full time and teaching and going through a rigorous biochemistry degree in my undergrad. This is what I think happened. I had leaky gut to the point where I developed an allergy to all mushrooms.
Oh,
so
wow.
yeah. So now I use them, but I have to be careful about how I use them. I'm very selective about how I use them. I can't just take a mushroom product off the shelf because I'm going to have a pretty bad reaction. It's not an IgE response, but it is a technically it'd probably be called a hypersensitivity.
What are some non-herbal supplements that you recommend to your clients? Like I'm thinking, like my teacher Howie Brownstein, I feel like he constantly is, recommending magnesium. I'm just kind of curious if you have any non-herbal recommendations.
Yeah, yeah, magnesium is interesting. And if you're from the school of Paul Bergner, you're going to take loads of magnesium. And it's useful. There's no doubt about it. Over something like 80 different enzyme systems that it works as a cofactor in. Yeah, it's important, and most people don't get enough. It's true. And if you've got restless leg syndrome, try magnesium before you go to a drug. It may work brilliantly for you. It may not. If you get a lot of spasms, try magnesium. My brother-in-law, who doesn't believe in any of this crap, that's what he would call it. I made him a believer by giving him magnesium. He used to get really bad cramps, really painful. And I said, Mike, why don't you just try some magnesium? And he couldn't believe how well it worked.
It's pretty essential.
Yeah.
What were you saying?
Yeah. 5 years later, I walked into I was visiting him in Colorado, and I walked into his bathroom, and there was his magnesium. Unfortunately, not covered, just an open bottle, but nonetheless, he definitely was still taking his magnesium. I'm a big fan of acetyl L-carnitine. That is a really interesting compound, and sure, it transports fat across the mitochondrial membrane. Yeah, that's interesting, but it seems to have some really interesting effects on neurodegeneration, and that's what I'm now, being an older human. That's one of the things I'm really paying attention to. So, acetyl L-carnitine is really, really interesting. Here's a trick. If you're flying a lot across the pond, if you're going into time zones that are drastically different, acetyl L-carnitine, if you use it properly, it will help you. Now, this is no excuse to not have sleep. You've got to have sleep. It's one of the fundamental pieces in lifestyle that makes a huge difference in terms of our longevity. But if you can't get a good night's sleep, and you take 500 to 1,000 milligrams of acetyl L-carnitine in the morning, it will help correct the deficits that you'll experience due to a lack of sleep. There's been studies that show that people that get like 6 hours or less of sleep are basically, when they're driving, are basically the same as a drunk.
Oh, I believe it.
So, and especially as you age, it gets more and more important. So, acetyl L-carnitine is great that way. I use it a lot to integrate into new time zones, especially when you don't want to go to sleep. You want to stay up that day, right? You get to London or whatever it is, and if you go to sleep, you're going to totally screw yourself. So to stay up during that day, you use acetyl L-carnitine, and you're functional. Then you can go to sleep. Get back on the schedule.
Since we're talking about sleep, I have to ask. I always say sleep is like the number one pillar of health, and I actually don't know if I have any sort of way to back that up, but I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, if you were to rank sleep, exercise, and nutrition in order of importance for general overall health, what would you say?
Oh boy, that's really tough. God, it's hard for me to put one of those as number one.
Right.
Um,
but you have to for this exercise.
Okay. I think I would probably say exercise, sleep, and then nutrition. And believe me, I'm really a nutrition
yeah
fan. But from what I've seen on at least the data that I see, and nutrition is really an interesting point here too, because so many fad diets and so much misinformation and information that people, the latest health nutrition guru, embraces. Just look at the history of humans and what they've survived on, and we can survive on almost anything. It's not necessarily optimal, but we can survive on almost anything, and as long as it's whole food, right? So carbohydrates aren't necessarily bad. Proteins not necessarily bad. Fats aren't necessarily bad. Our ancestors have been surviving on this for literally millions of years.
Yeah.
We need to rethink how close-minded we tend to be about other types of nutritional plans. Yeah.
I asked because I have an older loved one in my family, and I would say their diet is pretty poor, but they'll lift weights on occasion and they get great sleep. And I got to say they're like super healthy and happy from my perspective. So like, yeah.
Sleep. Check out Matthew Walker if you really want to get into the sleep scene
Totally.
and understand it better. Matthew Walker's done a lot of nice work on it. He's got a recent book that's worth checking out. He ranks it as number one. Other people rank exercise as number one. To me, it's really hard to make a difference between exercise and sleep.
Yeah, agreed.
If there was a drug that could do what exercise does, pharma, everybody would be on it. Let me just put it that way. But there will never be a drug that can do that.
No. Elizabeth is asking if you have any favorite herbal and supplement nootropics, and any thoughts on phosphatidylglycerine.
Phosphatidylglycerine or choline?
Phosphatidylglycerine.
Oh, phosphatidylserine.
Okay. Elizabeth is on your level, so yeah.
So phosphatidylserine. Phosphatidylserine is really interesting, and I think it's useful. In terms of my own experience, I can tell you that I don't notice it as much as I do acetyl L-carnitine as a nootropic. And thank you for saying nootropic and not nootropic. Yeah. There's this whole younger generation that's saying nootropic. Look in the frickin' dictionary. It's nootropic.
Okay. So I said it correctly? I hope.
You did.
Okay, righteous.
Mangaferine is also a pretty interesting compound in terms of nootropics. Worth exploring. I still think ginkgo, even though all the bad press it's gotten, I still think ginkgo is actually really, really useful. I think it makes a difference for people.
I haven't heard any bad press recently on ginkgo. What's going on there?
Well, it's just the so this is Jerry Cott's story. I'm going to tell Jerry Cott's story. So Jerry Cott used to be National Institute of Mental Health, used to run a lab there. And he's got just impeccable credentials, came from a Nobel Prize winner's lab. The guy that discovered dopamine. I mean, Jerry's just really great. And he was one of the only people at NIH, or maybe the only person at the time at NIH that would take herbs seriously. So he set up a trial to study ginkgo. And he designed the trial, and then the way that NIH works, not just NIMH, but by the way, NIMH, sorry, is National Institutes of Mental Health, and NIH is National Institutes of Health. So, if you're going to do a trial, it's got to go through a committee. The committee looked at this trial, and it came back, and they changed it so that it would fail. You can set up the way you design trials. This is what pharma does all the time. You can set it up so it's going to be positive, or you can set up going to be negative. Gary, knowing it went through this, had to go through this committee, set it up so it was neutral. It's like, this is a good, solid, rigorous design. If we see an effect, we see an effect. If we don't, we don't. But when it came back to him, they designed it so that it would fail. And Jerry quit over it. He left in IMH and went to FDA over it. So they did the trial, and it failed. So there you go. So that's everybody that's got Stockholm syndrome around herbs believes that ginkgo doesn't really work.
But you think it does?
Oh yeah, I think it does.
Yeah. Well, it's been used for millennia, I'd imagine. So.
Yeah, well, but the Chinese didn't actually use it for brain, for cognition. They used it more for lungs. And then the cognition effect or use is a newer use of ginkgo, much newer use of ginkgo.
Gotcha. As I was mentioning pre-call, I was hoping you could tell the story of Linus Pauling not getting his dinner. I heard this in so I'll leave a link to this for the listener. There's a great lecture with you at an Ayurvedic resort, and you're going to tell a story here that you taught in that class as well. But
so Linus Pauling is a hero to me for many reasons. He was basically didn't have a PhD. He was really scrappy and made his way into the sciences without a PhD, which is really not easy. And also, he's the only man, I believe still to this point, this story that I tell is over, I guess, 30 years old now, but so it could have changed, but he's the only man to win 2 Nobel Prizes. So one of his Nobel Prizes was in biochemistry, I think, but the other one was for peace. And this is how he won the Nobel Prize for Peace. So World War II was going on, and Linus Pauling had a prestigious position at a university, and he used to teach, and he had already won a Nobel Prize. And so one day he comes home, and his wife says to him, "Linus, you're a smart man. You won a Nobel Prize. I want you to do something about the war." And he says, "What can I do?" And she says, "I don't know, but you're a smart man. Figure it out. Until you do something, there's no dinner." So, he finishes his dinner, and he doesn't think too much about it, goes to bed. He goes to work, does work in his lab, teaches a class, comes back home, and sure enough, there's no dinner. So the next day, he at the end of the class he teaches, he says, "Now, let's talk about world peace." And he talks about how we can maybe do something to create world peace. And he comes home, and his wife says, "Did you do something about the war today?" And he says, "Yes, I did. I talked about world peace." He got dinner. So Linus Pauling continued to do this, so he would get dinner. And eventually his commentary on world peace and the war got bigger and bigger and more volume, got more volume, and he was started becoming recognized as trying to be a peaceful person and a scientist, and making changes there. And the Nobel Prize Committee saw that, and they gave him a Nobel Prize for peace. So that's how Linus Pauling kept eating.
What a beautiful story. Well, I would love to promote something of yours, Kevin. You got any projects you'd like to share with the audience? Any place that we could send them to learn more about you and your work?
Well, I really appreciate that, Mason. Yeah. No, at this point, no. I mean, I've got 2 websites. The Spelman Report website is still up. If you're interested in that, send me an email. I'll for the audience out there, send me an email, and I'm happy to figure out a way to make that accessible. And then my phytochemks.com website just basically tells you about my consulting service. But that's, I don't really have much to promote at this point. If you're in the need of product development or interpretation of analytical chemistry results or claim substantiation files or anything like that, I can be your guy.
So are you telling me you did this almost just for funsies then?
The Spelman report?
No, this interview, yeah.
Oh yeah, I've always had a nice dinner exchange with you at conferences, and you seem like a really peaceful guy, and so it's just for fun.
I appreciate that. Elizabeth is asking, is it possible to get legacy editions of the Spelman report?
Elizabeth, send me an email, and I will put it in the chat right now, and we'll figure out something for you.
That's great. Well, very cool. Well, why don't we wrap it up? I know you got something else next on your agenda. I'm just kind of curious, what keeps you learning and growing in the field of herbalism?
Oh boy, that's a really good question. This is one of the reasons that I love formulating so much, is that really keeps me learning and growing. Sourcing also keeps me learning and growing, because it gets me into herbalism at a different level, where I'm looking at planetary sustainability and who's doing it right, and looking at the phytochemistry of the plants and how they're approaching extractions and that sort of thing. So, and then also the farms, love doing business with the farms and supporting them. So that's always a joy as well. But honestly, the way I keep growing is I keep skiing. That's why I live where I live. I'm 23 minutes from 23 minutes from a ski area, and there's no place I'd rather be on the planet than on a snowy mountain with my skis strapped to my feet.
I love that. I bet you really get in the zone. Like, you're totally focused on one thing when you're doing that. That's got to feel amazing.
Thank you for saying that. It does. People think it's an adrenal thing. It's not an adrenal rush. It's about flow. It's about finding that peaceful moment.
Yeah. Amen. Well, this has been a lot of fun. This was a very wide-ranging conversation. I really, really appreciate you taking the time, Kevin. And thanks, Elizabeth, for joining us as well. And thanks to you, dear listener, for tuning in. I think that's going to do it for this episode. We'll see you in the next Herbalist Hour.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. That was a lot of fun.
And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the HerbRally podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at HerbRally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from HerbRally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.